morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Very happy to be with you today. So my name is Jean-Marc. I'm working for Ciarán. I used to be Chief Investment Officer of ISDA until a year ago, taking care of the investment management of the company. And for the last year, I'm coordinating certain blockchain projects we have within the group under the umbrella of what we call FORD, which is the internal initiative on blockchain for Stenger.
Hi everyone, my name is Jean-Marc. I'm working for a legal firm which is called Gide, which is based in Paris. Formerly worked for the French Securities Market Authority, CNF. What we do at Gide, we accompany our clients in basically clients who are going to launch innovative projects based on blockchain technologies. We provide legal and strategic advice. And most of our work is really to build with our clients a regulatory prospective strategy. So how the rules will impact their project and how we need to probably make the rules evolve so they can develop their project in a sustainable environment.
Thank you very much for sharing your perspective. You see there's a lot of competence here, a lot of experience, and I see also in the audience there is also a lot of experience there, and I definitely would like to invite you to think also, and then there will be a chance to have a Q&A session. It's very important that you really follow the discussion and then to come up with your input. That's very, very valuable, very important. We are going to start first with a little imagination. We are sitting in an airspace looking to the Earth from space, really looking the whole Earth and think about the question, what are the key improvements that need to be made on our current financial infrastructure? So it's just really see the whole Earth. Can I start with you?
Yes. Well, actually, that's a very good question, and I'm sure there are many CEOs at banking level who probably ask themselves this question. Maybe I will answer by two elements. The first one, I would say, is to recreate, let's say, some kind of margin powers for banks, which today suffer, especially in Europe, from a very heavy cost structure, which is actually increasing year after year, notably due to the increasing weight of regulation and the way these regulations needs to be translated into day-to-day operations. Actually running a regulated business, especially in the financial sector, is very costly. The layers of control, oversight, risk management you need to put in place to offer the level of safety and quality which is needed by clients and through regulators, which is just the expression of the needs people in general expect for this type of very fundamental services is very heavy. And at the same time, considering the kind of oversupply that we have in the banking sector, plus the term structure of the interest rates, we know the pricing power of banks has shrunken over the last year. So you need to recreate some headroom to develop new services, to improve the quality of what you are delivering to your clients, and so on and so forth. When you dig into those subjects, actually, with the current technologies we have, and I think it's not a secret, banks are built on technology stacks which often dates back from the 70s or the 80s. It's very difficult to change structurally the way you operate. You can adjust at the margin, but all organizations are very heavy, very slow to move. It's difficult to go beyond marginal adjustments. I think maybe with blockchain technology, we have an opportunity. This type of opportunity.
We will see that in a later stage, just really the bold.
Okay. So my first point is the opportunity, which is tied to blockchain to structurally change the way banks operate, to dramatically reduce the internal cost of running some operations. The other one is to improve the quality of services by creating new features for clients, new products, which can address new needs.
Okay. From your experience with your association, I think you have done this analysis.
Yeah, and I would agree with every word of that. I think those are the issues that we see among our members, and those are the issues that we see about ISDA. So this level of fragmentation that we see in back office systems and processes, particularly since the financial crisis in 2008 and the rates of regulation that we had seen as a result of that. And that obviously gives rise to operational risks, a lot of manual intervention, a lot of cost inefficiency. So I suppose one of the benefits of technology, as you already said, is that improvement of operational efficiency, that reduction in complexity and fragmentation, I think would be very beneficial for the entire industry. Okay.
I would very much agree. So I think first it's really important to, when we look at the financial industry overall, it's important to recognize that the industry that is around us is much riskier than it used to be in the past. So the markets are interconnected, the products are more complex, and we've seen in 2008 that it's very easy to lose grasp of risks that are building up in the system. And so, of course, all the reinforcements in regulations and controls that have taken place in the last 10 years have very good reasons to be there. Therefore, they are still here, and they will continue to increase. We're seeing increasingly structural imbalances in trade and instabilities associated with, for example, tensions between the US and China when it comes to managing the flow of trade and the border protection mechanisms. So I think it's really important, first of all, to realize that the first improvement that we all need to put in place is to make our financial system more secure and more resilient. I think technology can help, but that's really the number one priority. And I think the second priority is, of course, facing the globalization of our economy. We're seeing more and more companies in France or in Europe who won't be able to grow indefinitely if they are only able to compete in their national or regional markets. And so making it possible for financial institutions and companies that rely on financial institutions in our geographies to more easily compete in foreign markets is also a big need for improvement when it comes to the financial infrastructure.
We haven't touched on the regulatory itself very much. I mean, you could go out and say, listen, the regulatory is just very bad. This is a roadblock. But maybe we can come back to the question in a later session. Let's go to the next step with blockchain. We now have this event. It wasn't an event, it was a non-event 10 years ago when some nerds shared a paper. Satoshi Nakamoto, I don't know still today who that guy is, and he shared an idea about a decentralized solution, but he said nothing about this, just the vision was a peer-to-peer payment system similar to cash. And this is created, we see today, a big change in the perception, etc. And now the question is, how will blockchain help modernize financial services, and what is already here and what to expect in 2 to 5 years? So three things, and how will it overall change, modernize, and what is already done, and how to look in the future. Maybe let's do the first two and then do the looking in the future next. Who wants to look on that?
Can I start with the second question?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm not right. Thank you. I'm just kidding. But about the future, and actually, let me talk a little bit about regulation, if I may, because I think it's actually one of the key points that it's needed to be tackled. When we look about the future and about how blockchain can help modernize financial services, we look at standardization. I think it's key that what kind of blockchain will be used in the future? Is it private? Is it public blockchain? What kind of standards actually the industry is building, which is the key question. Maybe Jean-Marc, I know that on the banking side, you look at your consortium, which was one solution. Then some of the big banks and some of the big financial institutions that try to create kind of private blockchain for safety reasons, for governance issues, this kind of thing. So I think if you're looking at the future, it's also from taking the regulatory standpoint is how we're going to move towards standardization that I think is probably one of the targets for market players.
Maybe if I may add a few points on this, and maybe also just to take a step back. When you are sitting in a bank today, actually in reality that these subjects are actually very new to us. It's only for the last few months or let's say a year or so that people look at this seriously as a business. And it's a pretty short period of time. So beyond the first experiments which have been made, I think the first learnings or the first feelings we have when we look at this to potentially move some of our operations or some products we issue for the benefits of our clients, lead us to think first that definitely there is not a one-fits-for-all answer to the question. There is this traditional debate indeed between public blockchains and private blockchain. I think it's a typical example. My view on this is that you won't have one solution that will impose itself to the market tomorrow. You probably have different types of blockchains, different types of protocols, both public and private, which will be adopted potentially in the future and hopefully in the short term for different use cases. So I think we need to go beyond this type of debate. Same when you are looking across the different businesses and the different type of financial instruments we deal with when we are in the bank, what we call our chain, an equity value chain, bond value chain, structured product value chain, an ETF value chain, for instance. Here also the answer is completely different. You may think to some, let's say, no-brainers, some areas or some products where the intrinsic value proposition, which is tied to blockchain, is obvious and will impose itself. And you have others where actually the value proposal is much more difficult to see. For instance, you have some operations starting from the client demand till the post-market activities, where we know that things are very inefficient and could be improved. But actually, it's already very cheap to operate and very secure. Sometimes with systems which are very old. I'm not sure the market will shift dramatically on those chains to a new technology. Just because, again, the value proposal for clients is not that obvious. So as time evolves and as we get more maturity in this, I think the market, banks, and clients will start to differentiate and probably go in one direction or another.
Okay, thank you very much. The focus now is very much on the existing system we have in financial markets where there is a financial market. But we also have quite a number of people that have no bank account at all. And I would assume that this could be also a very important discussion. Maybe Ken, you have an overview of these non-bankable people. Is the blockchain could be quite a great solution combined with the right devices? What can you say about this?
Sure. So I spent the last 10 years in Southeast Asia, and most of that time working for Indonesian banks and Malaysian banks on banking people who previously didn't have a bank account. I think I want to bring my view is a bit nuanced in this respect, in the sense that yes, financial inclusion is important, but so far there is no proof that blockchain has driven any kind of financial inclusion. If you compare it with mobile wallet solutions that have been developed in Asia and in Africa by telecom companies and that work relatively well. And so, while financial inclusion is really important, I think when it comes to very basic financial needs, there are simple technologies that are already available and that we should continue to promote to achieve that objective. However, when you look longer term, what you see is that blockchain remains, again, so what is the value of blockchain? In the very short term, and when you look at what consortium networks have achieved in the financial services space, it is a way to do some digitization that was not previously possible with simple internet. And blockchain hasn't invented the digitization of financial transactions, far from it. But when you look at a project like Congo or other projects in the trade finance space, there are situations where having a decentralized network is a more acceptable way for financial institutions to share documents compared with giving all the documents to a single party. But admittedly, once they will get comfortable working with that consortium, they will realize that it's much simpler to just create a new code together and put all the documents in that central database. And so really, digitization of financial transactions is not the value of blockchain. The value of blockchain is really the elimination of intermediaries. And why do we need intermediaries today? We need intermediaries primarily to control risk. If you look at the issuance of a bond, for example, there are specific roles associated with that are mandated by regulation. The CSD, the registrar, the trustee, the depository banks that support investors. All those rules are mandated by registration because it's really, really important when you put your savings somewhere that one of the links in the chain doesn't disappear at the time when you need to get your savings back. And so it's a very long answer, but really what's really important is to realize that blockchain is here to automate the roles currently undertaken by those intermediaries, and therefore to reduce the cost of having a safe financial system. And so, back to the question of financial inclusion, I think what we're going to see is that once the needs of those billions of new banking consumers will evolve from very simple payments and money market savings to more complicated products, the risk associated with those populations will also grow exponentially. And that's where we will see really the need for blockchain as a secure and low cost to manage the risk associated with those fast-growing financial markets.
Okay, now I think we go now into what we promised earlier into the regulatory topic. I mean, there is a regulatory framework, an existing one, and the question is, how does the technology integrate into this existing regulatory framework and into the financial standards? What is your assessment on that? And then what needs to be done as an adjustment that are most relevant to change some workflows in that space.
Thank you very much. Before answering to the question, maybe I can echo two things that Ken say about regulation. The first thing, I fully agree, and as a previously I was working at the regulator, so I can not agree more that the regulation we have today in financial services was needed because of the crisis. And we did our best to try to internationally collaborate to have standards that are high-level standards and appropriate and proportionate, and of course it's easy, but I think that at some point it was needed. So all this work, we need to leverage on this knowledge we had on the regular financial services to try to go further now with new type of products we see that are enabled by the new technology. So first point. The second point, then you mentioned intermediaries. And he says that blockchain, one of the things that blockchain can bring is that we working now peer-to-peer, and basically we do not have intermediaries, or I would say former intermediaries as we used to. I think on this one I do not fully agree, because what we see on projects we actually advise is basically new type of intermediaries. So blockchain technology is one thing. You can tokenize instrument, you can exchange financial instrument, tokenize, you can advise on this new type of instrument. But basically all we see is investment services, banking services, payment services, not so much new regarding the services that are provided, except from the underlying technology, okay? And we see the project holders that came to us. Basically, there are probably doing the same thing as a bank or a former historical player in the financial services usually do, but they're doing it in a different way because they're using blockchain technology. So what I'm trying to say is, first, I do not see a huge revolution regarding the financial services we're talking about. What we see is exchange platforms, we see investment advice, we see reception of orders, we see the usual type of investment services we used to see. I don't know if you agree, because maybe you can interrupt.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly do agree. I mean, I don't think that looking at the derivatives industry, I don't think we're going to see revolutionary change overnight. I think change is not going to be much more incremental and targeted on those areas where I think the market identifies it really efficiently can achieve through technology. I think coming back to this question of regulatory standards and standards in general, it is that we think standards are really, really key, and common standards really do need to be developed in a number of areas in order for this technology to be really leveraged. And the development of standards is really the role it has played in the derivatives market for the past 30 years through the development of market standard documentation, through the procurement of netting opinions, and increasingly through the development of working with members of technology, reporting standards, capital standards, etc. So I think, again, looking at technology and looking at what the technology might be able to achieve in the future, I think it's really clear that before even coming to regulatory standards, we need to focus upon identifying where existing standards can be increased, and it is that we focus on really three things. We focus on legal documentation, we focus on process, and we focus on data. Looking at data, a lot of big done in the regulatory sphere already around the development of UTIs and legal entity identifiers and things like that. A lot of work is underway. If you look at documentation, and taking a step back for a moment, if you think about a financial transaction, whether that be a derivatives transaction or any kind of financial market product or trade, really all it is a series of contractual rights and obligations of between parties. It also creates a framework for determining what should happen to that product should a particular type of event occur. And I think where standardization in the current documentation framework really falls down is, although the framework, thinking as the documentation is relatively well standardized, there's still a very high level of customization in the way that some of those rights and obligations are described, the way in which events are described, and the way in which they're tracked and monitored and categorized in firm systems. The issue that causes then downstream with the process, because the process is really just essentially the digital representation of the rights and obligations and events within that contract. So what should happen when a payment is due, what should happen if there's an event of default. Again, the issue that we see in some of our financial institutions is that the processes themselves are not well aligned with the contractual obligations. In many cases, the contract is really just an approximation of the underlying process that it supports. Within the industry, the process for very similar transactions are described in very different ways, even within the same institution. Processes across similar products are described in different ways. So there's a lot of work to do, I think, in developing standardized or developing increased standards for process.
I fully agree on that side, because my own experience when you talk with investors, that's one of the key questions. How is the regulatory framework? Is everything clean, etc.? And then very often, when you are in such an innovation track and mode, then you have to say, listen, it's not clear, it's not defined yet. And now it comes to the question to the regulatory side, how can you tackle this? I mean, this is a normal process, and without killing innovation, without killing people willing to pay something, to invest, is there also from a regulatory side an innovation step?
Yeah, so I think whether that comes from the regulator or from the market, I think both have to work in tandem. So just reflecting on those challenges I mentioned before, this has been doing a lot of work in advancing documentation standards through various different projects. So we've created legal agreement taxonomies and clause libraries to standardize and to create standard form contract wording. We've also been developing what we call a common domain model, which is a standard digital representation of a derivatives transaction, which is essentially product agnostic and links better to the contractual obligations of existing contracts. We've been working with the market, and we've also been working with regulators to roll out. So, for example, we're working with the Bank of England and the UK SCA at the moment to roll out the common domain model, or CDM as we call it, on their digital regulatory reporting pilot. So I think this is an example of where you have the market working together to define the problem, develop a solution, and then working with the regulator to try and address, as you mentioned, some of these, I suppose, things within the financial services industry, which probably lends itself well to technology, things like regulated reporting, things like collateral management.
I fully agree with your point about the need for the market to work together with the regulator, the legislator. It's key. Maybe 3 points, and then I will under Jean-Marc. I've said that basically what we see in the market is not new type of services we see being provided, but this being said, because of the underlying technology, probably some of the rules we have in place at EU level and national level are not fully fit for purpose. One example is the type of risks. If we're looking at all the regulation we have now in place in the EU, most of them derived or came from the financial crisis, and of course the risk we had at that time, market risk, systemic risk, all these type of risks. Now we're looking at technology, and blockchain technology, of course, one of the risks we can work with is cyber, and probably security, safety, and all these type of risks that we didn't really think about when we draft from a regulation. And of course the regulation also needs to be proportionate and enable flexibility for innovation to scale and develop. So this is one of the key points. It's not something new. And let me conclude on this with one example. And of course, we're in Paris, so I'm going to talk about the PAC bill and under the control of the MIT. One of the tools you can use in regulation is what we have done in the PAC bill is optionality and proportionality. What we have in the PAC bill is optional licensing. So you can opt for the rules. And to do that, you need to comply with a bunch of requirements that are quite heavy in substance. And here it's really one step towards, probably in the short term, an entire mandatory regime, but it's really a step, the first step, which was optionality, as put in the French law, which can help business to develop in a sustainable, clear, and enabling environment. I know Jean-Marc.
Just to add a somehow controversial point on this question about regulation. And there's actually at the current juncture, my view on this is that there is already a lot of things we could do with the current state of regulation in most countries. to me, the point at this stage is really to reconcile client demand and the way client and customer understand the current state of regulation and what is possible with the speed of, let's say, new regulation coming from. You can do already a lot of things. You can issue utility tokens or security tokens in most regions, in many countries, at least to test and to pilot some operations. We don't see that many of these operations out there on the market. So I think there is also a need for regulators to advertise better and more what is possible at this current stage to develop market needs and new services around this. And then, of course, everything is not possible today, so more will be needed. But advertisement of regulation is needed as well.
Thank you, Jean-Marc. I would like to mention that.
So, again, I'd like to say, I think on regulation, it's really important also to know what is the end goal. And that's where I think the point, I'd like to perhaps insist again on the point that I was talking earlier about intermediaries, because I don't think that there is any other value to blockchain technology if it is not to automate tasks associated with risk management currently undertaken by intermediary layers in our ecosystem. You don't need blockchain to do more fancy crowdfunding. You don't need blockchain to raise money for startup projects. A startup project which is low quality and cannot be funded by VCs will not be funded by anyone else just because it is funded on blockchain technology. So I think when we look at really what is the contribution of the technology to the financial system, the only real disruptive contribution is the ability to automate tasks that are currently undertaken by intermediaries and the post-trade layer. So it's really important to distinguish trade and post-trade. Of course, trade is essentially about distribution. Whenever you create a financial instrument, you will always need intermediaries to sell it. Financial services are not bought, they are sold, and you will always need to push them to someone. But on the other hand, on the post-trade side, again, there are many activities that are currently delegated to intermediaries because those intermediaries are essential to making sure that accounts reconcile and that the proof of ownership that you own something never disappears, and there is always someone accountable to make sure that we know what belongs to whom. I think those more mundane activities can be automated with blockchain technology, and therefore the first priority should be to establish regulations that make it easier for blockchain technology to replace those intermediaries. Regulations that make it easy to send cryptocurrencies to banks, or to raise funds for a startup via cryptocurrencies, or to do ICOs are certainly beneficial. But in my view, they will not transform the financial ecosystem nearly as much as the regulations that enable blockchain to replace layers in the post-trade layer.
Okay, thank you very much for this input. We come to the last question, and this is also open then for everybody, the question about what is incremental from blockchain and what is disruptive, real disruptive. But coming back to this one, you talk about automation, and very often we have in mind the persons dealing with other persons, but we have the situation that machines are dealing with machines. And this may also imply completely new ways of regulation. And that was my question also. Is in the regulatory space kind of an innovation per se? What is completely new that didn't exist, and you have to really regulate something completely new? I mean, for instance, do you have to regulate the machine-to-machine communication? Is that completely new? Probably yes. And these kind of questions. And the second question would be, what can get rid of some regulation because it doesn't make sense anymore? This is also kind of a cleaning process that belongs to innovation in my view, but we all forget about this. But let's now turn to the this incremental innovation thing and this real disruptive thing. And I, as a former banker, UBS, to be honest, most was incremental, cost efficiency, process efficiency, securities, automation, etc. Incremental. But what is really disruptive? That would be the question. Who wants to start?
So, so I think in the derivatives industry, I think change is likely to be incremental rather than sort of transformative overnight. And I think Ken identified post-trade efficiencies as an area, I think, where in the near term, at least, I think our focus should be. So in our industry, there's probably a couple of areas, such as regulatory reporting, such as collateral management. A lot of these post-trade processes that are largely driven by regulation, through which firms derive very little commercial benefit from doing things in different ways. I think lend themselves well to standardization and to automation to reduce a lot of the operational and manual layering. Because those processes are driven largely by regulation, it raises an interesting question, I think, to answer your other question around the regulatory framework that should exist. And I think, again, it's important that the market and regulators work in tandem to determine what the regulatory framework should look like as we move to this new way of doing things. Looking at the regulatory framework as it exists today, it's important to ask yourself what is it actually trying to achieve. So, increasing transparency, reducing market risk, improving financial stability. I think to the extent that we can implement new technologies that achieve those outcomes in ways that are an improvement upon which we've done today, I think that should be a very good basis. It would seem to make sense that that is the basis on which to begin discussions around potential revisions of this regulatory framework.
Thank you very much. Looking on the watch because I want to give the chance to the Q&A. Is there anything to add from your side? Okay, thank you very much. Also, the question basically is here, but you definitely have also the chance to ask other questions. Here is the microphone. Maybe we have one is here, and we do just have the microphone. Are there any questions or input from your side?
I have a question. This is and I work in the securities and markets team. So I've heard a lot about benefits and efficiencies in post-trading. So just maybe, Gadient said that using the gain efficiencies, but maybe I put the question to the others whether you see any benefits in the trading aspect of focusing, having clients or you can work on benefits in the trading of digital companies.
To whom was the question?
To everyone else.
To everyone, except you.
Since I had already commented on post trading.
Ladies first.
One point my colleagues, in terms of trading platforms, this is definitely some project that we see developing in the market. And in terms of advantages or benefits, one of the things that it's really put forward is transparency, the fact that you can know better who is owning the tokens. You have, of course, the traceability issues. You also have, in terms of benefits, the automation or certain tasks associated to the type of security you're going to tokenize and exchange on this online platform. So yes, most of these projects, I think, they're not live today yet. They are proof of concept, but are really developing. This is most of the projects we see. And regarding the benefits, I really tend to agree with what Ken highlights, which is automation of tasks associated to the securities. Then, and my last point, it becomes trickier when it touches on regulatory and compliance with applicable rules, because as you said, as you know, sorry, you don't have harmonized securities law in the EU, so most of the projects we see now are really national based. But then you have to comply with a bunch of rules, and when you touch to the rules applicable to a specific type of security, this law is not harmonized. So one of the barriers we have identified in the course of our project.
Maybe on our end, what we see usually as benefits for clients or for the banks are obviously different depending on the product you are talking about and on which side you sit, issuers, investors, or intermediaries. But usually points we have seen are, and what you mentioned obviously, transparency is a key point, but also I would say the possibility to reduce, for instance, nominals which are issued. Often when you are engaged in a traditional banking transaction, you are subject to high minimals because again the fixed costs of operating the traditional securities are high, so you are bound to, for instance, to issue a couple of millions security to cover this type of cost. And obviously this reduces your ability to place the security to a larger market segment. The fact that a token which is issued on a blockchain per se is investable from anywhere in the world. You are not bound by market infrastructure which are regional. Obviously, you're also still bound by the local regulation when it comes to client placement, MiFID, things like this. But at least when you are able to reach the client, then the process to actually purchase the security for the investor is standardized. There are other benefits around efficiency and time to market to issue a transaction. It's well known that time to settle a transaction should be much quicker. Most of financial transactions are actually today settled in 3 days. Obviously, with this technology, you can hope to significantly reduce this time to potentially a couple of seconds, which has many implications behind. And maybe to conclude on this, I would also say that sometimes there are benefits which are not that obvious, but which are potentially huge for the markets. You know, financial markets, there is what we see usually, the upper side of the iceberg, and then what you don't see again. When it comes to collateral management, possibility to put in repo your securities, that's actually what fuels financial markets behind the surface. And here also, in the efficiency gain you could expect from blockchain technology there, but also in the enhanced or effective regulation that we could put in place on this type of transaction, because you know banks and all financial intermediaries are obliged to report to regulators all these transactions, sometimes with very short time frame and with heavy data to be transferred in an automated way. It could dramatically improve operation there.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Yeah, there is a question over there.
For the video.
So, based on the initial vision proposal.
Sorry, what's your name?
My name is Arthur. Arthur.
Arthur.
Yes.
Great to have you here.
Thank you very much. I have a question about, because you are talking about these financial services, and the initial vision of blockchain was to empower people and bypass institutions, the banks, for example. And right now it looks like it's the banks themselves that try to appropriate the vision. Don't you think it's a bit paradoxical to have this kind of discussion when there are other powers of blockchain which are not fully exploited?
Yeah. The question is to?
If you, right now we are not maybe super, no, if we are not how to everyone, just a general question.
I can start. Actually, this question, we can make it highly, let's say, philosophical or down-to-earth. I prefer the down-to-earth approach. The initial idea behind Bitcoin, because everything started with this, was indeed to empower people in peer-to-peer transactions. And I think beyond financial services, that's a trend which is everywhere, in every industry and everywhere. so this is here to continue. I think the way all these type of services and new approach are actually being put in place, are implemented, then of secondary importance. It appears that putting in place an infrastructure and connections between real world, real people, and blockchain technology, you need to have some intermediaries, new ones or former ones will need to evolve. And I think the reason why banks are nowadays starting to get interested into blockchain technology and being this type of intermediaries, just because of regulation, but also because of their internal organization, they happen to be somehow organized to operate this type of role. But I would say it's almost just by chance or because of the story, but or this type of convergence, but there is no, let's say, specific willingness to reappropriate or to put under control something which initially was born in a different field or with a different, let's say, mindset. And maybe if I may add the last one, I would say, I think on the opposite, adoption, broadly speaking, of blockchain technology beyond sectors and industry has probably been slowed down, has been delayed, precisely because initially there was this kind of hiatus between the initial crypto communities who had this mindset and banks, and that's one of the issues we have today. If we want to be pragmatic and this to be adopted, we need to reconcile these two worlds to make it happen.
Thank you very much. You said the expression delayed. I'm not sure if it's delayed because you have to be realistic with regard to innovation. It takes a lot of time. And it's very hard to accept that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But also, I think you should not despair. And I'd like to make a comparison with internet adoption in e-commerce in particular. Right, so I think we would all agree that since the late 90s, online distribution and purchase behaviors have hugely benefited us and hugely transformed for the better the relationship that we have with retailers and brands. And still, what is the percentage of online consumption as a total consumer consumption? It is the highest in China at 15%. It is around 10% in the US, and in most European countries, it is somewhere between 5 and 10%. So, market which is online distribution that currently only captures less than 10% of the total consumer consumption has completely transformed the shopping experience and benefited 100% of the consumers. So I think we should be optimistic and expect that consumers will usually benefit even as soon as blockchain only starts representing a few percentage points of the total financial services industry.
Thank you very much. Is there time for the last question, or do we close your
Yeah, sure. If we have more questions, we should answer them.
Hi, Marta. I just, because I see a lot of debate around Facebook, Calibra projects, and of course the regulators in the US, but really all over the world have got numerous views on how that will be regulated, and primarily it's related to definitional issues, how crypto assets will be regulated, whether there will be a need of regulation. But I think the core point is that a project like that will go into the mass market, and that would ask a number of questions. And in your expert's opinion, what would be the key areas sort of to really tackle this point?
May you make a proposition? We have in the afternoon, we have a very strong topic on that, and Libra will definitely be one of the elements, I guess, when you talk about stablecoin or stablecoin-like things. Can I postpone it for the afternoon? Can I keep it for this? That would be great. Is there another question that is related to the future of disruption?
I'm Andrea. I have a question for the whole panel and moderator as well. So, the topic of reaching customers from different jurisdictions and also of short-term insight have been mentioned as a main outcome, positive outcome that could come from the use of blockchain. But I think we can agree that those aspects are more a matter of interoperability than of technology. So my question to the panel would be whether you have any vision on how blockchain-enabled financial services work could be made fully interoperable to harness those potential benefits, and what would be the bodies and the fora where this industry work would
yeah, I think that's a really important question. It goes back to my point earlier about standards. I think in creating and developing all these different things that we're doing, whether it's standardized documentation, whether it's e-process standards, through the CPA data standards, it's important that that's developed in a way that's interoperable. It's not our rules of standards, quasi-standards anymore to kind of impose what way of doing things on the market. I think what really needs to happen is this kind of foundational layer needs to be created, and then that gives technology developers and other market participants a framework in which to build these technology products in different aspects of the market.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think, yeah, a follow-up question.
Sorry to interrupt the panel. I'm Jean-Marc from the European Commission, Connect, and in particular to answer very specifically to your point. So 24 is one of the actions that we support at EU level. There are also one. We support the research innovation project, more than 2 of concept and supply chain project. But we have also recently created an association which is called ISDA, International Association for Trust Blockchain Application, which one of the main objectives is to provide a framework for all the industry players, also the regulators, to discuss together, and to provide those type of let's say, cooperation scheme for working on the product. So I invite you to look at INATA and the portal, and depending who are representing also become a member of INATA. And this association has been created in Europe for families of the players, but it's truly an international association. It's also for discussing separability, not only within Europe or within France, but across the world. And we will come back to that. We have early November, from the 11th to the 13th of November, big conference, the first big conference of this association, where the European Commission, the European Forum, and the Spanish Association is also organizing this service. So we'll come back to that.
Thank you very much.
Are there maybe one or a couple of last questions in the audience? If not, I do have one. Let's go ahead.
Maybe a question for Kim. So you want to get because so you said you were working on a system that handles post-trading aspects of security trading and blockchain. Maybe could you tell us a bit about the cash value of the transaction? Is that something that you're working on? What do you see as solutions to that problem? Or do you not see it as a hurdle that basically the kind of legacy banking blockchain can coexist with the blockchain systems?
Am I able to, it's about cash. Am I able to answer Reto, or is that what that So the cash leg is very quickly, right? So the cash leg is indeed not a problem, but an area where various explorations are going on, and no one can claim to have the full answer. there are three main schemes that are being designed by financial institutions. So one relies on the idea that you create some kind of stable token. So it lives in the network and you can use it to pay and do instant DVP. That's the simplest way technologically and from a regulatory standpoint. But of course it means that you need to keep a lot of cash in the system, collateralized. Although, to be frank, given the small size of blockchain-based transactions, it's probably not a big problem right now. The second approach consists in having some kind of utility settlement coin that you create every morning and you destroy every evening, so that from a treasury standpoint, you can still free up the cash, but have it on hand during the opening hours of the financial market in order to conduct the transactions. And the third approach is to rely on stable tokens that would live in the public network, which in some cases could be not fully collateralized, but instead derivative instruments, like the DAI, for example. Those instruments are probably much more adequate when it comes to consumer transactions, buying into small, investing savings at small scale, for example, into decentralized savings network. Obviously, those instruments are much less likely to be adequate for B2B transactions.
Thank you very much. We may in the afternoon have more opportunity to go deep in that topic. It's also kind of a definition case. I mean, innovation requires definitions. And very often you see when you have a new product, then it's not defined yet. You do not find it somewhere defined as an official expression of the financial authority, etc. But my experience in UBS shows that you can live 20 years without having a new product with an expression that it never been reflected in a record of an official financial repository, but it works. I mean, so it's just also one element of innovation that we have to make sure that we find the right definitions. And I think the regulatory people are helping on that, because you have to derive from the past to bring an order into that chaos. Okay. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for the panelists, Jennifer. Thank you very much, Jean-Marc, Ken, and Ciarán. Thank you very much.